Hello everyone, my name is NM Lipsa and today I'll be sharing with you some of the information relating to the topic Impact Goes Viral and how COVID-19 affecting corporate mergers. I hope you and your family are doing well and safe. Before we continue, I would like you to connect with me and check my website at www.lipsa.com or email me at n.m.lipsa@gmail.com and subscribe to my channel. Did you know that the current COVID-19 pandemic poses unprecedented challenges for companies involved in mergers and acquisitions worldwide? COVID-19 is changing our lives more rapidly and more profoundly than we could have ever imagined. All over the world, government orders their countries into lockdowns. Factories, they're stopping production. People, they're stopping buying. All the citizens are confined to the four walls and they are teleworking. The business, they switch to work remotely wherever possible. The schools and colleges, they're also transition to the online courses. And within these few days, the stock market has lost around like 40%, and the central banks are putting together the packages against which the bailout during the financial and sovereign debt crisis fell. And it is no surprise that this pandemic will also pose significant challenges to the companies who are undergoing mergers and acquisition control as well as various corporate transactions. Mergers and acquisitions has been exploring the potential impact in the middle market with various coverage of stories relating to the Delhi merger and acquisition deals, specifically focusing on the interviews with the deal makers and also several factors like the current impact of China's economic growth and how the virus has impacted the US companies. Specifically, when we talk about this outbreak in China, various like within that country, the economic growth have which was like 6%, it has fallen to 3.5% in the first quarter of 2020. Now, the outbreak of this was also felt in 2003 and 4, but the concern was not that severe, like compared to our current situation now. It is nothing that the China's economy could be bigger, but it could be connected to the rest of the world. So that's why it has, impacted a lot of business. And Walmart in corporation, it is also anticipating a financial impact on the first quarter potentially because of China's business, and they have like a lot of current sales mix which has significantly impacted their expenses, which is relating to this outbreak. There is, there is also some data where they say that some maybe so far there was no such significant impact which was visible, but in relation to M&A deals, but there is a chance that this slowdown of the global economy can affect a lot of industries and can significantly delay the mergers and acquisition deals. So and this impact is felt across the worldwide situation. Currently, US is seeing a mixed level of activity, specifically in this time of uncertainty in the public equity market. Some new transactions, both buyer side and seller side, are still coming, but at the same time, certain existing transactions are put on hold. The transactions currently are at a risk and appear to affect larger transactions. And remember, when we talk about this long-term, merger and acquisition deals or long-term M&A activities, it has disrupted, and specifically it is because of continued manufacturing slowdowns, and there are like the stock market volatility which has really impacted the business. So when we talk about this mergers and acquisitions and about the slowdown process, then maybe it is because there is some um, events which were now closed, or maybe the outbreak have affected the travel. Various businesses are shut down, and that is causing delay in the um, closing deals and completing the due diligence process, which typically takes between 3 to 6 months to complete. Now the question is, what are the potential roadblocks that the M&A industry may face following the containment of the virus? Well, the first concern is that it will delay the due diligence activities and communications. And maybe because we're doing everything online, we're using digital platform. So therefore, in the future, maybe a virtual data room can provide a secure digital transfer of information to conduct the due diligence, which is very crucial at this time to help to reduce the due diligence activities. So the role of a virtual data room will be very, very significant at the current moment of time. Do you think cash is king again? There is a pause in providing finance to deals because this COVID-19 continues to roil the global economy. There are some companies which are helping, some private credit market, they're helping to fund various companies for the deals, but again, cash is tight. And maybe that is the bad news, right? And there is no funding available for M&A deals. And when there is no, funding available for M&A deals, the question is, can we continue on that, or we have to wait? Well, apart from that, the real question is, do we have new deals to fund? Because we need to have new deals, and the fund aspect will come the next, will be a next question. So there is no new deals to fund. COVID-19 related volatility has significantly reduced the M&A deals. Global announced M&A volume have dropped to 25% to $621.5 billion spread across 8,465 deals as of March 20. And US announced the transactions are showing a significant drop-off. The volume of US deals has plunged 57% to roughly $203.2 billion for 2,307 transactions. As per the law firm Searman and Sterling, the private credit market isn't frozen, but at the current scenario, both buyers and sellers, they are evaluating risk. Investors are looking for value and going through the whole process of repricing the risk and taking selective opportunities. Investors are taking stock and evaluating the potential risk associated with that. I would like to draw your attention to the seller side perspective. The question is, whenever the seller want to take a decision, they have to see how much flexibility do they have, right? Transactions that are signed and subject to a binding agreement may have little or no flexibility to renegotiate terms. Sellers with deals that were in process but do not have a binding agreement may reassess those transactions and decide whether to bring them to the market or not. Based on that, they want to see whether they want to continue in the transaction or not. Not only the seller side, let us just also focus on the buyer side. The corona related downturn has impacted the stock market, and it presents an opportunity for the buyer with cash. The private equity firms, which are still sitting on 1.71 trillion war chest, are there, and it is a time to make a lot of money and support great companies to continue to keep those great businesses going if they're facing temporary, adverse developments. We can say here, the cash is king again. Let us now focus on the US M&A market. As of the current period of time, there is bearish on the US M&A market for the short term. But we can expect a significant disruption given the market events until we have seen the number of coronavirus cases peak and we get on the backside of the pandemic. Hopefully, the number of new cases announced each day decreases. And once that happens, we can see bullish effect on M&A activity both in the medium and long term once the market adjusts to the new normal. Maybe there will be record of high valuations, which is likely to decrease, and will also may have a very favorable low interest rate environment and access to financing both from commercial lenders and alternative financing sources, that is private credit and debt funds. And certain underlying dynamics, which is driving the M&A to this point will continue, like the digital transformation and the technological disruption. Well, market chaos breeds opportunity. Let's see. As the crisis unfolds, there is enforcement against cartels. You must have seen various kind of products have now excess pricing. So there is an ongoing investigation for the excessive pricing and also the assessment of collaboration agreements in different sectors like pharmaceutical, life sciences, manufacturing, retail industries, which is likely to become a priority for the regulators as the companies reacts to the impact of COVID-19, and some of the government resources are devoted to merger reviews for the enforcement in those areas. In US, the federal antitrust agencies, they remain open and have adjusted to the merger review process in the light of COVID-19. And they are now accepting the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, they are now accepting the electronic merger filing only. And there is no early termination that will be granted for any e-filing while the temporary system is in place. And the timing agreement for the merger review are expected to be revised for complex transaction. So there is a need for timing adjustments under the review process, you know. And the merging parties, they're also expecting some of the delays for getting clearance in US due to extended timing agreements, or you can say the teleworking employees or potential illness. So there should be a measure that should be taken, and the impact of global merger reviews should be analyzed.
I was reading an article which was very interesting, specifically focusing on the COVID-19 impact on the M&A transactions. So I thought to share with you. In this article, they have focused on various factors, various important variables that are very significant, and how it is going to impact the M&A transactions. We know that the COVID-19 outbreak, it has spread across the globe, and M&A participants, they have to consider all these factors that I have presented over here, these 6 factors, both in terms of M&A process, the timeline, and also the deal terms, which is related to the closing dates that are very near to the pandemic. So as the financial market continue to be impacted by the pandemic, the impact on M&A transaction heavily depend on debt to finance the acquisition. So all the buyer and sellers, they have to consider these factors, and how they can focus on various sources of funding, specifically the seller. They have to see how to utilize the debt to finance the acquisition, and what could be the possible challenges in these financial aspects in recent transactions. So here I'll be focusing on these key important factors that the buyer and seller continue to work on it across the globe. So coming to the first question, that how will COVID-19 impact the deal process and its timing? So it is very important question, and for that we have to focus on the auction process, government approval, covenants, due diligence, financing, and purchase price negotiations. Now, first aspect is auction process, right? And here, because of the pandemic, as a buyer or seller, we have to always expect a slowdown, and because everything have slowed down because of the lockdown and social distancing, and it can also lead to potential retraction in the process, especially in the companies or industries which are hugely affected by the industries. So nowadays, the current dislocation in the market and uncertainty about the financial impact on the economy and individual companies, it is not unreasonable to expect that there will be less auction process, fewer auction process. So sellers currently are undertaking a process that need to actually, you have to adjust your timeline, specifically when there can be possible logistical challenges, and there will be, of course, some kind of delays, because most of the government organizations, specifically the federal government, they are now shut down, right? They have the inability to continue their functions efficiently. So we have to expect that this COVID-19 pandemic is going to slow down the auction process. And here, in this case, the buyer with cash on hand will certainly have a competitive advantage in an auction compared to those that need funds to finance the acquisitions. The second aspect is government approval. So buyers and seller, right, they count on longer response times from federal and state governments, and many organizations, specifically in terms of federal level or state level, local level, even at international level, government and their staffs, they're struggling because of this pandemic, and they have to work remotely, right? And because of the health issue which is due to the COVID-19, it is causing all delays. So here government are specifically focusing on those activities which are very significant and dedicating less attention to the resources which are not critical at the current period of time. So both buyers and seller of the M&A transaction should give themselves some extra time to prepare for these challenges, and they should also take into account that there is a need of more time to prepare, file and complete any kind of filings and obtain any required consents, specifically in relation to various merger filings or approval of environmental investigation or good standing certificates. All these may be under a waiting period of time. So it is really challenging. The next aspect is covenants. Parties should consider whether any debt need to be reviewed or reconsidered. Specifically, what will be the timeline for purchase price adjustment? What should be focused on the regulatory approvals? Sometimes, it will take longer time to get the government and regulatory approval compared to the pre-COVID period, right? Specifically for filing the government and forms for regulatory approvals, and also whenever they have to initiate M&A deal, to close M&A deal, the logistics that are required may not be available. So there will be logistical challenges. For example, any original documents like a deed or any kind of signatures that to be done in the documents, it will not be easy to do that because everybody is working remotely due to the social distancing. So that is also another aspect which need to be considered for this M&A transactions. Then comes the due diligence. Buyer and seller, they should prepare themselves a longer than usual due diligence period. The seller may experience challenge in providing certain information, certain documents, materials to review, because again, everyone is working remotely. And in-person management meetings or visit will be difficult, if not impossible, but again it will be very, very challenging. And buyer should consider expanding the scope of diligence to focus on specific areas that may be particularly affected by COVID-19. So it includes like target company supply chain, IT system, insurance coverage, and sometimes also how to respond to COVID-19 with employment loss, business continuity, solvency risk, and ability to serve or provide service for its debt. It also focuses on the licensing and privacy implications because of the remote working arrangement. So we have to work on all those forces. During M&A deal or M&A transactions, buyer should also focus on how to obtain financing, because at the time of pandemic, market is really uncertain, which is again a challenging time to obtain funds, and there is a greater chance of delay in availability of information for lenders. For example, like audited or interim financial statements, different kind of projections like the cash inflows or the projections for profit, projections for the sales, even the financial models. All these difficulties, all this could lead to delay in closing the deal, and there is a greater chance that it will be delayed for those transactions in which a buyer requires financing. Last but not least, purchase price negotiation is another important consideration for M&A transactions. Negotiation on the purchase price generally takes time, and again, during this COVID-19 outbreak, there is a longer period than the normal, so that there will be a negotiation between the acquirer and target firm, or we can say the buyer and seller, when you have to also work on the valuation of the target firm, right? Maybe you have to make forecast for target firm's revenues and earnings so that you can make a better negotiation. And we know that negotiations can be done not on the price but also in deal terms, and it always depend on several factors, like what is the party's leverage vis-a-vis the counterparty, and what will be the scope, reach, and how long this COVID-19 outbreak will be continuing. So buyer may also insist on the purchase price adjustment. There may be deferred payments, and not just the buyer but also the seller, they may insist that because there is like COVID-19 situation, which is a well-known risk, and but the risk does not specifically mention how much is the quantity of risk that to be borne by the buyer. So all these factors need to be considered when involving the M&A transaction, and it is going to significantly impact the deal process and timing. The next question is, what are the provisions in M&A acquisition agreements which may be impacted? For that, we have to take into account the material adverse effect, closing conditions and termination rights, representation, and warranties. So let us first focus on the material adverse change or material adverse effect clause. So for that, there are like different aspects. You have to focus on the pandemic, epidemic, public health emergencies. You have to focus on what will be the disproportionate effect, what will be the dollar threshold as a bootstrap measure. There are different aspects relating to it. So for example, a buyer should seek to exclude the pandemic or epidemic or health emergencies from the definition of MAE in order to shift the risk of occurrence of such events to buyer, while the bar should include the pandemic, right? In the occurrence of such events, in negotiating the definition of M&A is very important, because you have to involve in debt, you have to involve in financing the acquisition. So the definition of M&A in the contract is very important documentation between the bar and its different lending sources. Then if you talk about the disproportionate effect, if the parties they agree the definition of M&A does include the pandemic or any kind of health emergencies, the seller should attempt to qualify such events as disproportionate effect, right? And maybe the pandemic, epidemic, or public health emergency that cannot be deemed to cause an material adverse effect unless it disproportionately affects the seller, while buyer should seek to avoid all such qualifiers. Then another factor is that buyer should also take into account to adding a dollar threshold to cover any kind of matters that are related to the pandemic, epidemic, or other factors adding to this MAE definition. Say for example, any change, effect, or event occurrence or state of facts development that would adversely impact the company's business operations or assets or conditions, specifically the operational and financial conditions of the business, that is going to impact the revenue or earnings of the business. The next aspect is closing condition and termination rights. So if the transaction is structured as a two-step or delayed signed close transaction, the agreement will include certain closing conditions, and the buyer and seller should carefully consider all these closing conditions, like closing the deal, right? What should be the different conditions that may be impacted by this COVID-19? Maybe it is related to the governmental filing, obtaining government approvals, and all those things. Then the third aspect is representation and warranties. In this situation, one important variable is seller disclosure. Seller should consider including general disclosure regarding the impact of COVID-19 and its general impact and specific required disclosures. Then the situational representation. Buyer should consider requesting situational representation and warranties which will address the adverse impact of COVID-19. Then whenever you are addressing different impacts, you should also focus on understanding the impact of COVID-19 on account receivable, because there will be obviously difficulty in collecting the funds from your customer. You have to focus on inventories because there will be disruptions in the supply chain, right? So it will not be normal as earlier. So the inventory may be insufficient. We have to also focus on the top customer and suppliers, because COVID-19 may result in customer and supplier reducing the level of business that are being done. So there may be withdrawal of the business, there may be termination, there may be some breaches in the contractual provisions. You have to focus on material contracts, because COVID-19 may result in seller or their contractual counterparties terminating the contract, or there may be delays in the performance. Also, you have to comply with law, specifically at local level, state level, and federal level. And sometimes you have to focus on government orders, because all these order limits the extent of buyers and sellers business operations. Then another factor is labor and employment. So because of the COVID-19 health impact, there will be mass quarantine, including the government imposed or self-imposed quarantines. There will be closure of school, there will be disruption in the workforce, and maybe there will be shortage of labor, which could adversely impact your business. Then there is insurance, which is another factor. COVID-19 may cause material business interruption, and the seller may not have business interruption insurance coverage. And if they do have such insurance coverage, the buyer may want to include a representation that losses from the pandemic or any kind of health emergencies are being covered. You have to focus on the interim operating covenants. Buyer should consider including more interim operating covenants so that they can deal with prospective changes in buyers and seller business in order to cope with the effect of COVID-19. The third question is how will COVID-19 impact the representation and warranty insurance market? So, the R&W, or the representation and warranty insurance underwriter, to begin including the exclusion from the coverage for losses stemming from the impact of COVID-19 based on the assumption that the buyer have already taken into account the impact of COVID-19 into account.
With the pause in M&A activities, pain are down, and there is delay in signing the transactions. Parties are looking for what are the existing funding obligations. Let's wait and watch and see how the things are changing. Maybe some of the companies are still waiting to complete the pending deals and for making the new ones. All my thoughts are based on some of the recent articles, and these are the references. If you want to read more in detail, please have a look at all these, various articles.
Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you are staying safe and healthy, and hope you like this video. Thank you very much.